PG, or she also hold the degree of law, and ma'am has also completed postgraduate diploma in distance education, and her core area of interest is educational planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT, open and distance learning, and inclusive education as well. Participant Shakila ma'am was the OSD for 14 years in MHRD, and she was the nodal officer of NEP. She was the OSD of the NEP 2020, Department of Education, Ministry of Education, and ma'am was also nodal officer of flagship program of Government of India, that is National Mission for Teachers Training Program, which is later popularly known as Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission for Teachers Training Program. Popularly, we know it as a PMMMTTP. Participants, this mission was for training of the teachers, especially in higher education teachers. And similarly, ma'am was also launched very ambitious programs of Government of India during 12th five-year plan, which is known as Center for Academic Leadership and Educational Management, CALM, Leadership Academic Program, that is LEAP, and Annual Refresher Program for Teaching, that is ARPIT. These were the very popular program during those days in 12th five-year plan, and that was under the nodalship officer of the our Shakila ma'am. Shakila ma'am is the beautiful combination of academic caliber as well as administrative expert as far as education is concerned. She is a versatile and active resource person, not only HRDC MU Aligarh, but also other academic bodies of India. Lastly, I will just say, I don't have any agitation to mention here that with full responsibility that she is having the authority of all the dimension of NEP 2020. Participants, if you have any doubt, any query regarding the NEP 2020 in your various colleges, universities from where you belong, you feel free to ask. Ma'am is very interactive and very humble to respond you. With these words, I think this today's topic is, governance and management of higher education as envisaged in NEP 2020. And she is the best and suited, I will say the suitable resource person to justify with the topic. With these words, I welcome again ma'am you for on this forum, that is HRDC AMU Aligarh. Thank you, ma'am, to joining with us. Now you mic over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Aftab Ansari, and thank you for the kind words of introduction. You could have been still more briefer so that we could have had more time, but nevertheless, let me sort of try and say my format is slightly different in the sense that I really like to hear the participants, and in the first 10 or 15 minutes, it's about 3:38 now, at least till about 3:45 or 3:50, I can have the pleasure of listening to a few of you in terms of not necessarily a query on the NEP, but even on any aspect of the NEP. Don't restrict yourself to the topic today on governance and management. You can ask on any aspect of the NEP, since we were a part of that entire formulation and we know the entire policy inside out kind of thing, because we articulated that, we drafted it ourselves. So please feel free, introduce yourself in terms of your discipline and the institution you're associated, and let me have a few of y'all, at least 3 or 4 of y'all, before I start talking on the theme that has been assigned to me. So can we have a few participants? I thought I had seen someone raising the hand. I couldn't recall the name, but if that person had a query, please go ahead. It can be a suggestion, it can be a viewpoint, it can be critiquing the NEP, it can be a challenge that you all are facing, or an experiential part that you want to share.
Amit sir, Komal ma'am.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
It's my pleasure to hear you at this platform. Really, as I have heard your introduction, it gave me too much pleasure, ma'am. And I know some of the person like you make the NEP such useful for the students, for the academic bodies also. Ma'am, my query is related with the project work. Actually, may I am teaching at Bareilly College, Bareilly, Department of Economics. It is a college, not an autonomous body. It is an affiliated college, and here is more than 2,000 students are enrolled only in humanities, except other disciplines. And the project work awarded to each and every student. How it is possible to us to assign such different topics and to evaluate them? Because of such huge numbers. We are only 10 faculties in our department, and more than 600 600 to 900 students are enrolled in my subjects. That's why it becomes a big challenge with the midterm examination and evaluation and 2 times semester and semester examination also. It is my first query with the UG students. And the second one is query is connected with the PG students. My university had designed the curriculum for PG students and recommended dissertation work initially from the first semester. But finally, at coming up to the fourth semester, they withdrawn it. And it is too much surprising that project when such things will be doing by the UG students, but it becomes not compulsory and not essential or not as optional for the PG students. Uh, so then I have some queries related with this research and project work. Thank you.
So two things, Dr. Komal, and may I request all the participants to switch on your videos unless you have a bandwidth problem. See, the resource person does not like to see a blank screen on the other side. I would like to see human faces on the other side, though we are in an online mode. So let us not, subject the resource person to the torture of looking at black cubicles with Samsung written or some name written or some phone ID written. Please put in your name. I like to see the person's name that is visible on the screen. Unless you have a bandwidth problem, please switch on your video so that I can see all of you. So what Komal was asking was a very pertinent question relating to the internship projects. We have made it compulsory that all undergraduate students have to do internship. Firstly, the reason why we did that is the UG graduate student going out for the jobs were found to be lacking in a lot of employability skills. And that was a major concern that we in the policy making experienced and realized that, we are subjected to this criticism that higher education graduates are unemployable. And that is something which is not tenable at all. So we needed to instill that kind of skills in them that they may be able to develop, look into a particular problem, identify a problem first, look at that problem, identify some set goals or objectives for that, then look at how you can collect the data, analyze that data and come out with a report. Now, this is not equivalent to some PhD thesis or some MPhil dissertation or any such thing. It's supposed to be a very small exercise, and they're not supposed to be necessarily, unless they're engineering students or they are MBA students, that they will do it in the industry or in the corporate. It is merely to instill work skills which may be helping them to go out, communicate with people, collaborate with other institutions or resource persons. And it is not necessarily that the faculty has to be sort of hand-holding them for every stage of it, like being a guide for the student. All that we want you to do is look at first and foremost the UGC internship guidelines. If it is a student of literature, then maybe they can intern with maybe a media house, they can intern with maybe a library, they can intern with maybe a museum. There are many such opportunities. So our conventional thinking that all these students will intern and do a small project in the corporate sector has to be done away with, because we don't want that. You see, the numbers are something like 42 million students who are pursuing their undergraduate education. 42 million students will not be absorbed by industry or corporate for their internship project. So what we are looking at is, it can be a small community project, or it can be an impact analysis of a government scheme. You know that the government of India and the state governments have a number of schemes which is done by public funding. It is our taxpayers' money that is invested into that. It can be for construction of roads, it can be for providing gas to the domestic consumers, it can be for the right to education, it can be for trying to provide cooked meal to our school students. there are a number of government schemes, and none of these government schemes, let me be very fair, have been studied by anybody. No impact analysis has been done. So the best area where you can identify topics for undergraduate students across the range of social sciences, humanities, commerce, and so on, are to look at this large number of government schemes. And the data today is not very difficult to get, unlike what it might have been 10 years back, because all the data is available on the websites of these schemes. So you know the data, you can take up a small pilot in your own area, give them a minor scope. The scope should be very, very limited. But what you need to tell them and what they need to gain by that exercise is that they are developing their own research abilities, in the sense not of a high-end research, but they are developing what we may call collaborative skills, communicative skills, problem-solving skills, analytical skills, and also then the oral and written communication skills to come out with a small report. This is what is intended. So faculty, all that they need to do is, in your own discipline, which are those areas that you can identify for the student, rather than leaving the student to be left on their own, is something that you can do, so that you pinpoint a few areas where they can take up internship. Now, coming to the PG, I don't know whether the UGC curriculum for the revised 2-year PG program has talked about doing away with dissertation, and whether it is a mismatch between what your university has done and what the UGC is saying. Because my own understanding of the PG curriculum is very clear that there is a project dissertation that they have to do, and it is of a much higher order than the small time internship project that a UG student would do. So I don't want to really comment. Maybe the university, for lack of certain reasons, may have taken that as a temporary measure. But as per the UGC course curriculum framework for the PG program, dissertation work is an integral part of it, and that is supposed of whether you do it from first semester or whether you start introducing it only in the second semester or third semester is left to the institution. But I don't think they have withdrawn that. So I need to know the clarity, and I think maybe it is more of a university level decision, which may be subject to some temporary requirement and may not be necessarily continuing in that manner. Thank you, Komal, for asking that. Can we have one or two more?
Thank you for clarity. Actually, the NEP stands for equality. That's why I am asking, because it should be equality in all the curriculum. Means if a dissertation or project work is subscribed by the NEP, then why our university has withdrawn it? We are also against
that may be only an individual case, but it is not withdrawn as a part of the PG guidelines that UGC has brought.
Yes, ma'am. We are also disappointing with this action of the university. Too much disappointed.
Can we have again? I hope I don't have to keep repeating the participants to switch on the videos. You are actually insulting me if, as a resource person, if you don't switch on the videos. Let me be very clear. When a participant who is there on the other side does not switch on the video, it is like telling the resource person, I don't want you to see me. Do you enter a classroom in your own college and then draw a curtain in front of you because the student should not see you or you don't want to see the students? So please switch on your videos. Let me at least have that basic understanding what I'm trying to say, that I want the participants to switch on their videos.
Ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead.
मैम मैं डॉक्टर अमित कुमार मिश्रा इलाहाबाद से मैं फिलोसफी सब्जेक्ट से का मैं विद्यार्थी हूँ और मैं ये NEP 2020 के बारे में जो मेरा ऑब्जर्वेशन है मैम, कुछ ऑब्जर्वेशन है, कुछ सजेशंस हैं कि अगर ऐसा हो सके तो जैसे जिन कॉलेजेस में हम पढ़ते हैं वो किसी न किसी यूनिवर्सिटी से एफिलेटेड है और वो उस यूनिवर्सिटी में लगभग 600 कॉलेजेस हैं मैडम, जिसमें 5 लाख के करीब विद्यार्थी पढ़ते हैं। ऐसे विद्यार्थियों के संदर्भ में जो सेमेस्टर सिस्टम को लागू किया गया है मैम, उसकी वजह से जो है दिक्कतें आ रही हैं। मुझे लगता है कारण यह है कि वो सेमेस्टर सिस्टम पढ़ाई के लिए समय कम और एग्ज़ाम के लिए ज़्यादा समय दे रहे हैं। इसमें इवैल्यूएशन और एग्जामिनेशन और उसके बाद सप्लीमेंट्री इस तरह के एग्जामिनेशंस होते रहते हैं और पढ़ाई के लिए बच्चों को समय नहीं मिलता है। डेप्थ नॉलेज लैक कर रहा है। जब डेप्थ नॉलेज लैक कर रहा है तो रिसर्च की कैपेबिलिटी उनके अंदर कभी आ ही नहीं सकती है, क्योंकि वो सामान्य ज्ञान से भी वंचित हो रहे हैं, तो रिसर्च की भी प्रॉब्लम डेवलप नहीं हो पा रही। दूसरी चीज़ इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की बात करें, जहाँ तक कि आपने फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी दे दी है, आर्ट्स का स्टूडेंट जो है वो साइंस में जा सकता है, कॉमर्स में जा सकता है, लेकिन उस फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी के रिलेशन में हमें टाइम टेबल मैनेजमेंट में बड़ी दिक्कतें आ रही हैं, क्योंकि हमारे पास इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जो है बड़ा लिमिटेड है और समानांतर रूप से तीनों फैकल्टी को एक साथ चलाना और उसी में एक ही विद्यार्थी को एक ही समय में कॉमर्स या साइंस या आर्ट्स के विषय को पढ़ाना बहुत डिफिकल्ट है मैडम, बहुत ही ज़्यादा समस्या आ रही है। एक समस्या यह है। फिर उसके अलावा जो हम अध्यापकों को वेकेशंस मिलते थे मैम, वो वेकेशंस जो है वो हॉलीडे नहीं होते थे, वो अगले सेशन के लिए अपने को तैयार करने के लिए, अपने को रिफ्रेश करने के लिए, अपने को मोटिवेट करने के लिए मिलते थे। और आज की स्थिति यह है कि हमारी वेकेशंस जो है वो पूरी तरह से समाप्त हो गई हैं, क्योंकि वो यूनिवर्सिटी अपने बैकलॉग को ओवरकम करने के लिए कभी भी एग्जामिनेशन हम पर थोप देती है और हमें जो है निश्चिंत होकर अपने भविष्य के बारे में, अपनी तैयारी के बारे में, अपने को तैयार करने के बारे में, अपने प्रोजेक्ट्स के बारे में कुछ भी सोचने का अवसर नहीं मिल रहा है। ये बहुत ही मार्के की बात है, इस पर लोगों का ध्यान नहीं जा रहा है, लेकिन मैं लगभग 2 वर्षों से, जब से NEP आया है, इस संदर्भ में बड़ी पीड़ा महसूस कर रहा हूँ और कोई ऐसा मंच मुझे नहीं मिला जिस पर मैं अपनी बातें कह सकूं। आज मैं अपनी बात आपके समक्ष ये कह पा रहा हूँ कि शायद कुछ रिस्पांस मिले या मेरी बात ऊपर तक जा सके। ठीक है मैम, थैंक यू।
अमित, मैं एक ही बात जानना चाहती हूँ, कैन आई रिप्लाई टू यू इन इंग्लिश? आई कैन डू इट इन हिंदी बट माई clarification may not be much.
English
Okay, thank you for giving me that this thing. I fully understand. आपने जो बताया है मैं आपसे बहुत तरीके से सहमत हूँ, लेकिन let me clarify why semesterization, why projects, why this requirement कि student सिर्फ आर्ट्स न पढ़ते हुए कॉमर्स भी पढ़े, साइंस भी पढ़े। एक हम जिस तरह से 20वीं सदी के जो products है, we are all products of the 20th century teaching learning environment, where we looked at understanding knowledge as being only discipline specific. We did not like the idea that along with sociology I can learn physics or I can learn chemistry and so on. That scenario has completely changed. So whether we like it or not, and the reason why the time factor that you're telling, let me clarify that first. Because NEP came out in 2020 in the peak of COVID. And we had the second and the third phase of COVID that came around 2021. So we all resorted already to online education. And there was a huge backlog because during the lockdown, the institutions were completely shut down. To be very frank, it was that timing that came in wrong, in the sense that the NEP was coming out just when COVID was there, and COVID resulted in a backlog. That backlog that we are trying to even now try and cover up, that has not happened. So that is the reason why when you frame the academic calendar, technically, like if we are having an academic calendar, your academic session should start in June and it should go until April. In between this, you get your 2 months vacation in summer, you get your 3 weeks vacation for Diwali, and you get your 10 days vacation around Christmas leading to New Year. This is the normal pattern, and we are talking about 200 working days. Now, this has got completely shifted, and it is not something that is permanent, but that is likely to sort of come in pattern, in fall into pattern, because now UGC and everybody is conscious that institutions should come back to their old academic calendar. Now, just because that has happened, we cannot look at a scenario where we can afford students not to go in for semesterization. It is well established that instead of having a year-long curricula and having only an end of the term examination, the real learning, if what are we actually doing? We are trying to help the learners to learn effectively and achieve certain outcomes. That outcomes is not studying by memory, studying 10 days before an examination with a cheap guide and then vomiting it on your answer script. and then saying you have a degree in hand, which is absolutely a valueless paper. So let us be very, very self-critical about how the current scenario of higher education was not really resulting in young graduates, all of them becoming gainfully employed. So the need to bring about semesterization, the need to have a very rationalized academic calendar, all becomes very important from the learner's perspective. Now, we teachers have to deal with certain situations. See, for the first time when I started my teaching career, Bombay University never had a teacher's strike. But we had 100 days or nearly 120 days where there was no teaching allowed, because even though we were fresh faculty, the union was not allowing us to come and take classes. And they said, you cannot, you have to show solidarity. Now we have dealt with that, and yet we completed that curricula in many ways. For me personally, I used to invite my third year BA students to my home. First year and second year, I could not because that was a large number. But third year BA students, which were just about 50 students, I used to invite them to my house and somehow arrange it, because at that time there was no technology for going in for online learning and so on. So we have to understand that these changes shake us from our comfort zone. The irrational part that has happened is that we have kept semesterization in a very collapsed academic calendar. That is, we are starting very late and we are ending early, and we are trying to complete the courses in 2 semesters in a very compressed manner. And therefore, you find that your teaching hours are limited, especially when we are saying that we need to incorporate so many things which are experiential by nature and so on. But let me tell you the other side of it. Let me tell you that if we actually do not think of our emphasis only on lecturing, but in terms of trying to say that students will do a number of activities. Let me give you a simple example. Your year-long course curricula, there are topics that have been outlined, which you have to cover in semester 1 and in semester 2. First itself, you relate it to the outcomes that you need to have. Outcomes meaning what understanding the student needs to gain, what knowledge they need to acquire, what competencies they need to have, and what skills they need to have. Do we do that? We don't. Let us be very frank. If we do not disaggregate the content that we are to teach in these 4 critical goals, then what we are doing is we are continuously just saying, I am a lecturer in such and such a topic. Whatever I know, I have to go and tell it in my class. I am not seeing whether the student assimilated it at all. That is where we fail in achieving the learning outcomes. But if you divide your entire syllabi in the terms of the course that you are teaching into these 4 outcomes, and then for each topic, you in your particular class that you take, which is of 1 hour, you don't have to talk blah 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 for 1 hour. That is not the way to do it. That has been a failed system. That system has shown it has failed, and we are still doing it. Why? Because we have a legacy of teaching like that, and we cannot come out of that mental frame of mind to think that no, I will talk only for 15 minutes and I will listen to the student. In what way? Not listening to what I am doing right now with you all, but telling them to make group discussion, come out with some presentation, do some quizzes, give them some small surveys, give them some activities like field activities, and involve the learner. 3 types of engagement we are saying: learner to learner, learner with the content, and learner with the teacher. And then you have a vibrant class, and in a certain topic, even just a group discussion of half an hour is enough to tell us that the outcome of that topic has been achieved through group discussion. We are not innovating as teachers. And I'm saying that knowing fully well, having come from a legacy where we were only teaching by lecturing, and now realizing that lecturing doesn't help. So your entire collapsed semester also, you look at your entire topics to be covered, you look at the outcomes, and then you decide for each how much time I need to spend in my actual talking to the student in lecture, and how much time the student will be involved in activity. When you do this, the pressure reduces. Now, universities with their academic calendars, having not done a rationalized way of doing it, they have put everything in terms of trying to be completed in a compressed manner. Some things that you can do is where you say your vacation period has been reduced and so on. If it is classes, take some of these classes in a hybrid mode. Some of them can be online if your students have access to the net. And let me tell you, the Telecom Authority tells us that the smartphone penetration in India is unparalleled in the world. And we know very much that people in extremely remote areas also access the social media, and they should be known that they should be able to access that media even for the learning purposes. So use hybrid models, use online models, but if you conventionally sit with the same pattern and juxtapose that with the reforms, that becomes difficult. Now, your other point, even though I am trying to exceed and talk because I have to have that about 45 minutes for my talk on governance and management, I still want you to appreciate why it is important that an art student must understand little bit of science, must understand little bit of commerce, if necessary agriculture, if necessary law, if necessary engineering, if necessary medicine, if necessary music, any vocational subject, why this is necessary. The kind of three changes: one, that knowledge is no longer existing in silos. It is no longer excluding other disciplines, and that is why students must be equipped with multidisciplinary knowledge. Two, that learning is not just theoretical knowledge, but it is also experiential, it is also sustainable, and it has to be flexible, because you may like maths or you may like a language, I may not like it. So each student has different potentials, and therefore individualization and customization. And the third most important thing, directly impacting jobs for the students, comes from disruptive technologies. So when we are talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and all that, please understand, you and I are living in times where even if we did not have many of the technological skills, we may survive. But if these students do not know about all these new changes, it is impacting the job profiles. Today, we do not know what the future jobs are. So unless our students are having exposure to all these different kinds of knowledge exposures, the graduate of today is not like you and I are. We are I-shaped graduates with only disciplinary depth. And that was acceptable when we believed that disciplines existed to the exclusion of other disciplines. Whereas today, the graduate is expected to be a T-shaped graduate. Not only depth, but breadth of various knowledge areas, of various multiple skill sets and capabilities. So the need, therefore, is not because we in the committee said कि इंडिया में तो चेंज आना ही नहीं है और इंडिया के लोग ऐसे ही रहेंगे और हमारे बच्चों को हम कुछ भी चेंजेस नहीं लेके, because we have to be globally competitive. India has the largest youth population. The whole world is seeming to be aging. The soft power, the human capital comes from India. And if our Indian students are going to go, चलो business as usual, train ये जगह से अलीगढ़ से यहाँ जा रहा था वही तरीके से जाएगा और कोई भी change हम लेके नहीं आएंगे, is not the selfish manner in which we should look at it. We are here as teachers, as part of an education system, to ensure that we empower our learners to become productive individuals, contributing to their own individual growth and to their societal growth and development. If we have to do that, we may have to make certain changes, which may, for a certain transition period, make us come out of a comfort zone, but gradually things fall into place. And as I said, this accelerated problem that we see is because NEP coincided with COVID, And therefore, many universities even today are doing with a backlog, which is adding to the pressure. So I am not trying to say because I am coming from the NEP, but you said that you are speaking at this forum because you want me to be someone who communicates. I am fully aware on the ground that there are implementation challenges. But the challenge is not to close our eyes and run away from it. The challenge is how to address that challenge and find out solutions. Now, we don't expect all colleges in India, 48,000 colleges in this country, to have the same level of infrastructure. We don't share resources. We don't enter into agreements with other institutions which offer commerce or arts and so on, because we want everything in our own institution. That approach is a non-viable approach. So sorry to not give you something that you may have liked to hear, Amit, but the fact is that if we have to bring change, change is always something that we resist. Change always comes with certain operational problems. And I'm sure if you do an outcome-based approach, if you use innovative pedagogies, if you use hybrid models of teaching, if you engage with the learners, not to think that you are the know-all and they are the know-nothing, but that you are there as a facilitator and you are actually along with the learners in an exercise of teaching learning, then this kind of time factor, this kind of overload, this kind of overemphasis on summative assessment will all seem to gradually fall away. But it is not easy. I am not saying it is easy, but I do not think that if we abandon many of these reforms, then India will have a demographic disaster, because India's growing unemployment rate will be seeing a trifold jump, and instead of our youth having gainful employment, they will be a lumpen in the society, creating law and order problems and doing other things because they have no jobs on hand. And that is not a future that we should like our youth to be experiencing. So Amit, with all due respect to your challenges, which I am conscious about, sensitive about, make little changes so that with these small little changes, the teaching learning methodologies and so on, I don't want to repeat it, but please understand, and maybe you can listen to my YouTube talks when I talk about holistic and multidisciplinary, where I've explained in detail how teachers have to re-look at themselves as a facilitator, creating active learning environments and motivating students, being a co-learner with them, so that the pressure of only lecturing and lecturing and lecturing, which we believe has helped, has really not paid off in terms of the outcomes that our students need to have got. So yes, other challenges like having a rationalized calendar, getting into an MOU with institutions, these all we need to work. And please understand, don't think as faculty, I don't have a role to influence the institution. Whatever you're hearing in all these sessions, don't keep it to yourself. Go back, speak to your HODs, speak to your other faculty members, bring it to the notice so that these changes are brought about. Otherwise, it is like you have NEP with all new things and you have an old system and you're trying to impose that there, and it does not work because you find that operationally it becomes difficult. But attitudinally, I want you to feel convinced that unless we bring these changes, we have been able to make some success in life, but our students will be looking at a very bleak future of being unemployed. Maybe they'll get employment for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 40 years they have to remain active. From 20 to 21 or 22 to about 60 to 62 or so. 40 years they should be gainfully employed. And if they have to be, we cannot have shortcuts to it. We have to go the hard way, and we must, as teachers, feel that whatever that hard way is, initially maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you may have that transition problems, but gradually you will find that the system has actually brought about better returns from the student's perspective. So please bear with that. I hope I've been able to inspire you. I can see that others are raising their hand, but it is almost 4:10 now and our session concludes at 5. The topic of our discussion is on leadership and governance and management. Give me time about, I'll give you all some 10 minutes again at the last for interaction. But now I would request you to bear with me on the topic that we have for the session today. So with no ill will to any participant here, I want you to feel inspired that you are a teacher who is being there to help learners, and not feel that you are a part of a system and that system itself is a problem. That should not be the approach that we go with. So come now to the topic that we have. Once again, I would urge all of you to switch on your videos so that I have the pleasure of seeing the people I am addressing. Now, the topic that we are discussing today may not have a direct bearing on each one of you all, because we are talking about governance and management. But why we are introducing this theme under NEP sensitization is because we strongly believe that faculty must be nurtured with leadership development and leadership goals, so that they become tomorrow the leaders of academic institutions and they work towards better governance of their institutions. So all organizations are very concerned about issues related to governance and management. Today we lost a tall leader in the corporate world, Sir Ratan Tata, and if you hear all the words and tributes that come, they consider the person as having a governance pattern which was so humanistic by nature, and that brought about very much of ethics in governance in the corporate sector. Now, we also as academic institutions are institutions which will be performing better if we have better governance and better management. That is why it is important for us to understand this topic. So what I'm trying to do is, it is about 4:10 now. I'd like to stop at about 4:50. And I'm dividing the topic into 3 segments. One is, when we talk about governance in higher education, we need to understand certain challenges and problems that are there in higher education. And that means the institutional problems that may be there. How is it that NEP is trying to address that? And how is it that faculty as leaders can contribute to bring about changes? Then go to certain instrumentalities related to internal governance, including an institutional development plan, and spend some very limited time on regulation in higher education, which relates to the regulatory bodies. So the challenges, I'm not saying that I'm looking at all the challenges, but some of the major challenges that Indian higher education system faces is firstly coming from the size of that higher education. 1,200 universities, 47 to 48,000 affiliated colleges, some 13 to 14,000 standalone institutions, 1.6 million faculty, 44 million students. This is a massive size. And as a size, when you look at it, we are proud that we have one of the largest higher education systems, but that size itself adds to the complexity. The complexity comes from 2 factors. One, that education as a subject is in the concurrent list of the constitution of this country. And therefore, when you have a subject on which policies come out at the central level, at the federal level, at the union level, it is the state governments which are responsible for implementing it. And many of you have already voiced concerns about universities in your states, how they are not in sync with the government of India. And they need not be in sync, because we must appreciate that in a federal setup, state governments would have different aspirations. It may not be against the one of government of India, but they may not be able to align to what the government of India says. And it is acceptable. It is very much in the spirit of accepting that education is a subject in the concurrent list. The second complexity that comes in is because of the nature of the institutions. So when I say 1,200 universities, these universities and the affiliated colleges are part of those universities. These universities are in different modes of jurisdiction. You have centrally funded institutions, funded directly by the government of India ministries, and which have the largest funding that goes to them. The second is the state-run institutions. they are having jurisdiction only within the state, and they get funds only from the state government, and UGC gives them development grants. And the grants that go to these state-run institutions are very minuscule, maybe 20 crores, maybe 40 crores, as opposed to an IIT, which may get 1800 crores annually, as opposed to a central university, which may get something like 280 crores annually. So where is that 40 crores and where is that 240 crores or 1200 crores or 1800 crores? But what is the mismatch is that the centrally funded institutions have only 6% of higher education students. 94% of the student enrollment is in the state-run institutions, which, like Amit rightly pointed out, has infrastructure deficit, faculty shortages, lack of teaching learning resources, so many things. And we are expecting that this 94% students will have quality education. So this is the first dichotomy. Other than this, of course, you have deemed universities, you have private universities, you have self-financing colleges. So the character of each higher education institution will be different because the governance model for each of them will be different. That which is run by the government of India will have a different governance model as against one run by the state, as against a deemed one, as against a private university. Each of them follow different governance model. That adds to the complexity, because for good governance, you must have certain standardized procedures, and that standardization is found to be missing. That is the reason why, if Komal is talking about that their PG program has got a different curricular structure than maybe what UGC says, or an academic calendar of no university matches the ideal academic calendar that the UGC is talking about, with 200 working days and so on, that is all arising because of the governance models being different. And they have different bodies that take care of their governance. So the first challenge is the quantitative with the diversity that we have. The second challenge is that these institutions are, I would say, discipline-wise very fragmented. We have created a disciplinary based approach, and that has resulted in arts colleges, science colleges, engineering colleges, commerce colleges, medical colleges. We do not look like AMU and all, maybe exceptions where they are comprehensive universities. They BHU, AMU, Jamia, Delhi University, Pune University, Jadavpur University, these are all comprehensive universities where all disciplines are available. But largely otherwise, the universities and the colleges particularly are fragmented by disciplines. And that again is a challenge. So the quantitative factor, along with the fragmentation, along with the diversity of the institutions, has directly impacted the poor quality of higher education. So the two seem to be as if there is quantity, that we will lack in quality. And that is being shown when I told you that the 6% enrollment is in centrally funded institutions like the central universities, the IITs, the NITs, and so on. And the 94% students are in the state university. And which are the institutions that come up in the global ranking? Not the handful of one or two state universities. Firstly, we come in only up in about very few numbers. We are there in the bracket of 1 to 100. We are about maybe 10 institutions. 100 to 200, maybe we go around 12, and 200 to 300, we may go around maybe 25 or so. Beyond that, our numbers are not reflecting in any global rankings. That comes because the funding is going in, as I said, in a minuscule number. They are dealing with lesser number of students, and therefore excellence is there. Whereas, like Komal was saying, we have almost 5,000 students or 2,000 students and so on. That's a large number, and the funding is not at all commensurate to that. So you don't have infrastructure, you don't have ICT facilities, you don't library facilities, you lack in laboratories, you have faculty shortages. All this adds on to this very large gap where there is large student enrollment and very poor quality education. So the quality aspect is a challenge that we are looking at, and that we are trying to address through the NEP, by looking at 2 or 3 changes. One is that we are looking at rationalizing higher education by the functions of higher education. So what is higher education all about? It is about teaching, which is knowledge dissemination, or it is about research, which is knowledge generation or knowledge production. So the teaching and the research, we were unfortunately looking at it in 2 watertight compartments. In undergraduate education, we never thought of instilling research, and we are addressing that by introducing that research component. So we are giving them that small internships. We are making the bachelors of the 4th year with an option of research. We are trying to say under common courses, we will teach them research skills. This is therefore addressing and recognizing that teaching and research are complementary to one another and are to be seen as 2 sides of the same coin. And they, in this same breadth, we are trying to say, therefore, that let us not categorize higher education institutions as centrally funded or state funded or privately owned, but whether they are teaching intensive universities or research intensive universities. So the idea is that the institution for itself consciously decides whether it wants to focus largely on undergraduate education or whether it would focus on PG and doctoral education. And many of our institutions can take a call on whether they would be teaching intensive or research intensive. The second gap that we are trying to look at is between skills and education. So skilling was seen as something subservient to general education. And whole idea of vocational education is to prepare plumbers and masons and electricians. And we don't want blue-collared jobs. We are too high and mighty to think of blue-collared jobs. So we thought that everybody goes into the brainy stuff and the cerebral stuff and goes for regular education. But what we have now realized is that learning is multidimensional, and having theoretical knowledge without skills is a no-gooder. And it shows that there is no win-win situation at all. So integrating skills with education has come in the 4-year curriculum with the SEC courses, with the value-added courses. And we are looking at preparing our students with that pillar of learning, that is learning to do, where they may learn about logistics management, supply chain management, retail management, digital marketing, agribusiness management, because these are the kind of skills that that T-shaped graduate must have, not just the disciplinary depth, but that upper bar of letter T, which is the multiple skill sets, which includes a number of skills. So the skills and higher education, we integrated through a national credit framework. We integrated through the 4-year undergraduate program, and we introduced that idea of internships so that people actually get hands-on problem-solving abilities to be able to really solve issues when they go out. The next gap is between what I said, research, going up a step further to talk about innovation. So innovation looks at actually putting students to a thought process where they think of new ideas, the ideation, the conceptualization, which leads to new products and which leads to setting up maybe startups and so on. So innovation and entrepreneurship. You use this sentence very commonly, that we should not be preparing our graduates to become job seekers, but to become job creators. If they have to become job creators, they should be instilled with the quality of driving enterprise. And if you are watching international conferences, the recent conference of Quad that took place, we had a number of international nations telling us that Indians are known for their enterprise. They are risk-taking by nature. And that is a quality which we have not even taken cognizance of in our students. So entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurship, innovation, incubation centers, setting up startups, looking at industry academia linkages. These are some of the things that we have woven in, along with, for research, setting up the National Research Foundation. So quality, we have tried to address in the NEP through many of this. The next major challenge that we are talking about is the social and economic disparities. So while we are talking about reaching a gross enrollment target of 50% by 2035, and which is currently at about 27.1 with 44 million students. We are looking at about 80 million students by 2050. And if we want this 80 million students, it cannot be only certain segments, all sections of the society. That is the regional disparities, the social disparities, the linguistic disparities, the economic disparities, the gender disparities, the locational disparities, all of them have to be addressed, and the need for equity and inclusion, so that there is an equal opportunity provided for every student to be able to not only join higher education, but to successfully complete the program. So we are saying in the policy, the universalization of secondary education by 2030, that every child who enters the school education from 3 to 18 will complete secondary education, and then that student has a greater chance of joining higher education. Currently, only 67% from the school education join higher education, and that is not with a universalized system. That is not reaching out to every student. So here, the NEP talks about reaching a gross enrollment ratio, taking into account the socially and economically disadvantaged groups, which includes the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, the linguistic and religious minorities, women, transgenders, urban poor, those living in inaccessible areas, island areas, hilly areas, and so on, those children with disabilities, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, and so on. So the need, therefore, of looking at a sustainable model of higher education, where you're talking about every student, every eligible student coming into the higher education system, participating with an equal opportunity, and to be able to successfully complete their program. That is the challenge, and we have provided the solution. The next challenge comes from technology. We cannot ignore the fact that every domain of our life is dominated by technology today. And education is a sector which must integrate technology. And COVID forced us to use technology, but technology is not just for the sake of using technology, like we are right now seeing, not many of you switching on the cameras, not many of you interacting. This is a very, very, very absolutely low level at which we are using technology. Technology must be synchronous. It should be live streaming. It should be one in which that real experience of being in a face-to-face situation is replicated by using technology. So using technology, having the kind of ICT integration, even when I'm teaching in a classroom situation where I use a video, I don't play it for 45 minutes. I play only a clip of 3 minutes, where I use Google Forms, where I use online quizzes. These are some of the things that we have to adopt. So for teaching, improving the quality of teaching, to have a rich learning experience, using the best people who are available to come and give the expert talks, we're not leveraging all that at all, because we all want to exist in that small island that we are living in. And this is all possible because it's all permitted. It's there. No one tells you that you cannot do it, but we don't do it because we said no one told us to do it. No one stops you from doing it because you never innovated. You never even explored that possibility. So the need to look at ICT enabled learning, integrating it for examinations, integrating it for admissions, integrating it for normal governance, integrating it for data management, the idea of one nation, one data, using it for NIRF rankings, using it for accreditation. All this requires the extensive and very integrated view of using technology. And we are now waking up to that, and the policy has, in no other words, minced this. And we have also set up the National Education Alliance for Technology. We wrote it as NETF, but we have set it up as NEAT, as NEET. And this is so that we don't reinvent the wheel and replicate the wheel. And Aftab was saying, I handle the National Mission on Teachers. We brought Arpit because we want faculty to be able to create courses using technology and how to do online teaching and how to create online content modules as part of it. So when we talk about technology, it is for us as faculty to think of how we adopt this in a very effective manner. And I am not saying that there is a one size fits all model. Different locations have different levels. Whatever available is there, we leverage that to the optimum. The next challenge that we are talking of in higher education comes from, and I'm saying that as an academic who was there in a bureaucratic setup. You know, the bureaucratic setup, if you're talking about poor quality of higher education, wants to hang only one person by the noose, and that is the teacher. And that is their view, that teachers are unprofessional. Teachers are there because they never got any other job, and they are not serious in their business of teaching and learning. The only sole voice where I said you cannot generalize that, where I had an opportunity and where I was saying that they need to be trained, they have to have capacity building. That's how the schemes like National Mission on Teachers and Teaching came. Because the importance of looking at the professional development of teachers without attributing, saying that poor quality of higher education is the poor quality of teaching and the poor quality of teaching is the poor quality of the faculty, without drawing a linear argument of that kind. It is very important for us to understand, firstly, the professionalization of teaching as a profession, and that it has certain verticals that meet certain standards and parameters. And subsequent to that, for you, that you need very clear rules of recruitment, career advancement, professional growth, training and retraining, and sabbaticals so that teachers can go in for seminars and conferences and so on, and leadership development. So the NEP has tried to look at all this, restoring the dignity and the criticality of teaching, restoring the dignity of the teacher, ensuring that minimum working conditions are there, ensuring that proper service conditions are provided, ensuring that you have a very clear career progression path, along with the possibilities of training and orientation and continuous professional development and leadership development, so that they are able to contribute. You cannot look at teaching as a charitable activity. You cannot look at teaching as a job that you merely do like a clerk sitting and writing on files from 9 to 5. It is the human involvement with the students. It is the molding of the students. And for that, the teachers need to be supported. And that is what the NEP has tried to do. Two other challenges, and as I said, it is not an exhaustive list. Two other challenges that I want to talk about is the lack of funds and finances. And it is something that we have tried to say in the policy. Kothari Commission said 6% GDP. We have repeated that in our policy from 1968 to 2020. We are still there. We spend only something like invest only something like 4.4% of our GDP. But at the same time, we must have enhanced funding for public institutions. And at the same time, we must also expect that higher education institutions must become self-sustaining. So generating revenue cannot come by enhancing fees, because one of our goals is affordability. And therefore, if it has to be affordable, you can't jack up the fees and make higher education elitist. But how do you then get funds? You have to look at CSR contribution. You must look at private sector participation. You must look at alumni funding. You must look at setting up chairs, looking at industry collaborations. And these are the innovative ways in which we look at financing, including private philanthropy. And the last point is of internationalization. Let us be very mindful about the fact that the key word of 21st century ecosystem is collaboration. And it is a skill we do not lack, we do not have. We don't collaborate with our own colleagues. We don't collaborate across departments. We don't collaborate across institutions. But the key to 21st century learning education ecosystem is collaboration. And it is that which led to the idea that India should become a Vishwa Guru like it once was in its heydays. And that We will have student mobility and faculty mobility, credit mobility, program mobility, and institutional mobility. You see, at one time, if you had seats of learning like Nalanda and Takshashila, and Chinese scholars like Hyun Sang and others who came there, it's because at that time India was recognized as having the seats of higher learning. Today, you know the numbers? 7.5 million students go out of India every year, and 40,000 students come to India. See the difference in the numbers. And mind you, this number is going to increase because earlier the numbers were for PG and PhD, and today undergraduate students are going out in hordes. So if we want to talk about mobility, you must talk about cross-border higher education. You must have institutions which attract foreign students. And that is why under NAC and under NIRF, we are giving weightage to institutions which attract foreign students. So let us look at the challenges, and the NEP has provided solutions to some extent. I am not saying that it is the solution to all the problems, but we have to transit from the way 20th century education ecosystem was to the 21st century, so that our students are able to go out. And for all this, the last challenge that I may talk about is the poor governance of higher education institutions. So where does that poor governance come from? Autonomy and accountability. On one side, we say accountability has to be there because all public funded institutions where you're saying 1,200 crores is given to an IIT or an NIT, it is taxpayers' public money that is being spent, or it is 20 crores or 40 crores. So they are to be accountable to the government for the funding. They are accountable to the regulators like the UGC or the AICTE. But you cannot say that higher education institutions are government bodies like a government office, because they must be academically autonomous, administratively autonomous, and in the long run become financially also autonomous. So the balance between autonomy and accountability has resulted in looking at a governance pattern which is supposed to be giving a lot of freedom to faculty, to leadership, and so on, so that they can breathe that autonomy in terms of curriculum framing, in terms of the way in which teaching learning processes happen, in the way in which we conduct our formative evaluation, and also have the freedom in terms of conducting our end of the term examinations. So the whole change needs to come about, whether it is at a university level or in an affiliated college, where for affiliation, the major shift that we have recommended in NEP is that we want to move towards institutions becoming degree granting autonomous colleges. Now go back to the number I told you. We have something like around 47,000 affiliated colleges. Are we saying, or is Shakila trying to tell, that by 2040 India will have 47,000 degree granting colleges? No way. We are not saying that. We are only saying that some of these colleges with potential for excellence, they can become teaching intensive universities. Some colleges come together in an arrangement to form a cluster university. Some colleges continue to remain as constituent colleges. But all colleges over a period of time must become autonomous to become degree granting, in the sense that through standard setting, through benchmarks being achieved, to becoming graded, to get up accreditation, then get graded autonomy and move in the direction, like Amit, I think, said, one university has 800 colleges. It is only an examination machine, and it is only a revenue generation in terms of affiliation fees. So that is why the quality of education becomes poor. So affiliation is no longer a boon. It was a boon when India became independent to provide access. Today it is a bane, and ideally we should not have large affiliating universities. So when I was in the planning commission, we wrote in the 12th plan document, or rather the 11th plan document, that affiliation should be limited to 100 colleges per university. But in the NEP 2020, we have gone ahead and said, let us do away with affiliation And let us talk about moving towards degree granting autonomous colleges. Now, for all this, you need to have very vibrant leadership. It is and mind you, when you talk about leadership, academic institutions should not be headed by industrialists or bureaucrats or retired bureaucrats and so on. It should be headed by one of us coming from the field of faculty and teaching. So the need, therefore, to nurture leadership in faculty has to happen on a regular basis. And mind you, leadership doesn't come only when you have gray hair. Leadership has to be nurtured at 3 levels. Young faculty who join as assistant professors, mid-level faculty who are there as associate professors, and senior level who are there as professors. So we are looking at leadership development from this window of 3 levels of leadership development. Young faculty, when you want to take up projects, for example, what Komal was asking, you are displaying a leadership quality when you are identifying a topic, talking to someone in a media house or someone, and telling that there are my students who want to come and intern. You are negotiating with that institution. That is leadership. You are taking a critical call that there is an event to happen and you want to organize that talent. That is a leadership call. So we need to nurture leadership at all these 3 levels. And this has to be a part of the professional development of faculty. Now, what happens is leadership fails in our institutions for 2 reasons. A senior teaching faculty, usually a professor with 10 years of standing, who goes on to become the head as a vice chancellor, says that I have been a teacher of chemistry and I don't know anything of administration. You cannot make that statement at all. The moment you are donning the cap of being an HOD, a dean, or a proctor, or a vice chancellor, or a pro vice chancellor, you have to be empowered yourself to be able to say, I am not only the institutional head and I'm not just a faculty, but I'm an institutional head or a departmental head or a school head, and therefore I must know many fundamentals of administration. So the reason why our academic institutions get taken over by bureaucrats is because we as a faculty, there are 500 faculty in that university, and the person that the government feels is capable of making a change is not that faculty, but somebody else who comes from outside. Isn't it a shame for us? It is because we have conceded that ability to that person who comes from outside. So let us understand that as a leader, I nurture certain qualities, and that is 10 qualities that we are talking about. Visioning and strategizing, looking at a plan of action, communication skills, conflict resolution and handling stress, that is with time management and so on, looking at the negotiation skills as I just mentioned to you, looking at students and their student support and student grievances and better quality of teaching learning, looking at faculty and addressing issues related to faculty, their career growth, their participation in seminars, their working conditions, taking a fair view of faculty and ensuring that they have all the basic requirements to contribute, looking at research and skilling as another vertical for importance, looking at technology and its integration in your institution, looking at funding mobilization, looking at internationalization, and 2 other important things which we don't normally do: administrative rules and regulations and financial rules and regulations. We cannot, when I was in the ministry and people come and attend a conference, at the end of it, we ask them to submit a TADA form. I had number of faculty, my undersecretary used to come and tell me, madam, वो faculty तो बता रहे कि उसको TADA form भरना नहीं आता है, वो सिर्फ sign करके दे देगा. I said, if he signs and goes, how do we know what time he left his house and what time he has come back? We are not to do that. Let us be very clear. We cannot take excuses of this kind. So that when you are going into leadership positions, you must know your statutes of the university. You must know your rules and regulations. You must know the standard processes and procedures, and ignorance in law is not an excuse. If someone has taken you for a ride, you will be as much culpable for that act of violation as much as that low-level staff who may be any other administrative cadre staff who has not written the note well, and you have merely signed on the note, which is according as sanction to all the earlier notings that came on that file. So the need, therefore, for us to understand that there is nothing wrong in knowing administrative rules and regulations, financial rules and regulations. These are all critical to leadership. Now, in the policy, we have said for that first quality of visioning and strategizing that every higher education institution must prepare a document that we call is the institutional development plan. I often think in many of the sessions I take on governance that in my first intervention of 15 minutes, whether any faculty would ask me about an IDP, it means that we have never reached that stage at all. Institutional development plan is only a strategic plan of action that every institution must prepare, looking at a vision, a mission, a goal, a set of goals to be achieved in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. UGC has given guidelines. I have also written in various publications on how to prepare an IDP. It involves looking at, and you go back to your own institution and the website and read its vision and mission. Vision and mission is not cast in stone. You must revise it in keeping with the changes that happen. So one exercise that you all can do is look at your vision and mission of your own institution or your own department and change it in requirements that is needed for the current day and for the future. So IDP is an exercise where you set certain targets, both quantitative and qualitative, with certain key performance indicators. In the process, you also do a SWOT analysis. What are our strengths? If you don't have infrastructure, you don't have faculty, you don't have teaching learning resources, you don't have training programs, you are not participating in ranking, you are not participating in accreditation. Look at it all that as an internal SWOT analysis. And what are you doing for the students? What is there for the teachers? What is there for the teaching learning? What is there for the technology? Make an analysis and prepare an action plan. And it is not an action plan that you make it and throw it on the top of a library shelf and forget about it. It's a living document to be monitored and reviewed so that you look at your achievements, find out why we could not make it, and it is with timelines and it is with budget. And it is not prepared by a third agency, which is outsourced to a third party, but it is to be prepared by the institution itself, in which there are student representatives, faculty representatives, parent representatives, senior management, civil society, educationists, industry, scientists, all of them coming together as an internally driven document where you are envisioning for yourself and where you are an integral part of that exercise to go ahead making an action plan and a strategic plan where you would like to see your institution going forward. And the last 2 points relate to governance and regulation. We have recognized that all our HEIs have bodies like the Board of Management, like the Academic Council, the Finance Committee, the Research Council, the Academic Council, and so on. We have not said that any of these bodies are wrong. They are right in their own places. But these bodies have to become more democratic. They have to have certain standard procedures that they follow. And we also recommended an important exercise of preparing what we call an empowered board of governors. You can replace your executive council or your senate or your board of management, or you keep them and yet establish an empowered board of governors. Why that body becomes important is that it is not an externally appointed body. It is a body that has been created by the institution itself, like that IDP membership that I talked about. All the stakeholders are represented in that as democratically elected within the institution, and that will be a body which looks at the institution's growth every 3 years or every 5 years. And that exercise makes every person in that institution feel invested. One of the reasons why many of our higher education institutions don't achieve the goals is because there is a sense of detachment. My limited role is I am a teacher of sociology. I have nothing more in that institution. Whereas I am an integral part of that institution. And that institution's growth must contribute to my growth. My growth must contribute to that institution's growth. That kind of an equation comes about only through these kinds of governance structures. And so, just like the IDP task force, we must have an empowered board of governors, and it should be a democratically elected body with no bureaucrat and no government representative being on it, only the stakeholders involved in that body. They can be there on other bodies which are there, like the Senate or Board of Management. In this body, we don't want any external person other than our own people who are nominating an industrialist or an academician or a scientist or an agriculturalist or a sports person or a musician or anyone, because we're talking about multidisciplinarity. And therefore, all of them should be there, so that you look at art integrated pedagogy, sport integrated pedagogy, you look at many aspects of industry contribution, you look at startups, all these stakeholders feel invested in that institution. And the last point that I'll spend on is the regulatory architecture. So we have UGC, AICT, these are regulatory bodies. Like that, we have 17 such regulatory bodies. And at the time that UGC was created in 1956 by an act of the parliament, we had only about 50 universities in this country. And we only thought that the function it has is to regulate higher education, provide funds, do the accreditation, and do the academic standard setting. These four functions got combined into UGC, which are actually like saying in a government that the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary should be in the same body. All of us know that that is a self-defeating thing, because these functions are very different. And so we wrote in the NEP a light but tight regulation with the principle of division of powers of regulation, funding, accreditation, and standard setting, and said that this separation of powers would prevent the over-concentration of power in one regulatory body and would also prevent the conflict of interest. So the NEP recommended a complete overhaul of the regulatory architecture, saying that we will have an NHERC for regulation, the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, the National Accreditation Council, which will subsume the existing NAAC and NBA and have many other accrediting agencies. And we will move towards binary accreditation. We will have a Higher Education Grants Council for funding, because UGC will become null and void if this regulatory reform comes in. And we will have professional standard setting bodies to look at academic standards for architecture, for agriculture, for medicine, law, general education, and so on, technical education. And since UGC will be null and void, we will have to create a general education council to look at arts, science, commerce, and so on. Now, all these four bodies, NHERC, NAC, HEGC, and GEC, along with the PSSBs, are independent bodies, and there will be an umbrella architecture called the Higher Education Commission of India, which will ensure that there is a coordination among these separate bodies. But this has to come through an act of the parliament, because only then it supersedes the act that created the UGC. Since it is a matter in the concurrent list, though 2 times the Honorable Finance Minister announced in a budget speech, the HECI has not become a reality. And up to now, we continue with the old regulatory architecture, and that is why all the implementation guidelines of NEP continue to come from UGC. Moment this regulatory architecture is introduced in the parliament and passed by the parliament, then this new structure comes into being with 4 independent verticals in the light of light but tight regulation, and the idea that conflict of interest and over concentration of power among the regulatory bodies will be addressed through these major transformative reform. So overall, in my talk today on governance, leadership, and management, I have tried to sensitize you all and make you all aware about the large challenges or the huge challenges that Indian higher education system faces. And it is very easy for us to say, ye to reform hoga hi nahi. The question is, how do each one of us contribute our small mite? Small drops of water make the mighty ocean. And each one of us, through our professionalism and through our professional approach, should be able to make changes. And I've informed you things that you can carry back to your institution to work on preparing an IDP, looking at your own effort to look at your institution's turnaround, if I may say, and in which you are a critical contributor. I'll stop here and keep the remaining 10 minutes for interaction. Thank you.
थैंक यू मैम, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. आपने बहुत ही क्लियर कट एक डिमार्केशन के साथ एनईपी 2020 के मैनेजमेंट उस पर अपनी रोशनी डाली. अब पार्टिसिपेंट्स की बारी है, जिसमें एक हाथ आया. हर्ष जी कुछ पूछना चाहते हैं. हर्ष सर, अनम्यूट करके आप अपनी बात.
जी सर, थैंक यू मैम फॉर दिस वेरी इंफॉर्मेटिव एंड सिस्टमैटिक सेशन. माय क्वेश्चन इज
अपने आप को इंट्रोड्यूस करें, फिर बहुत ब्रीफ में क्वेश्चन रखें, अपनी बात रखें.
मैम, माय क्वेश्चन इज रिलेटेड टू for the direct admission system in most of the self-finance colleges. So there are many self-finance colleges which are taking the direct admission without conducting any entrance examination or any merit-based system. So ma'am, what is the rationale behind this? As we know that there is a large proportion of self-finance colleges in the higher education system. So if they are taking admission without any merit basis, then how can we expect the quality education or the better students for their employability skills? So is there anything in the NEP regarding this?
So as far as NEP is concerned, all that it has said is that public and private institutions are to be treated on par, that they follow the same standards and norms and practices. Now, the self-financing colleges is going beyond the idea of a private college. It goes beyond that because it is the investment made by a private individual in running a college. Ideally, they should also be following some criteria for admission. However, since higher education is an aspirational part and self-financing colleges are not charging less fees, they are one of the most exorbitant in charging the fees. The NEP can come into picture only when you see a complete mismatch between what an institution claims to offer and what it is charging the fees. So as to say, for example, that a self-financing college says that they have all the faculty, they have all the laboratories, they have all the libraries, and when you go there, you find a very attractive glossy brochure, but nothing is there on ground. Then action can be taken by the regulatory body. So the punitive role of taking action in form of penalties, in deregulating them in the sense that they can be derecognized, these are some of the measures. But having said that, all of us sitting here know the realities that India has. And that reality is that when we even know that there are events of this kind, there were institutions which we know in some part of this country which prevented an inspection team from entering the premises of that college itself. That is the system. That is, there are certain things that, and you don't want police action to be taken because you want a regulator should have the right to inspect. And so the NEP suggested certain things. One is it does not want an inspection part. It wants self-regulation using technology through public disclosure. And if there is a blatant violation, that you may take punitive action by sort of either in terms of deregulating that course or saying that is a null and void course and so on. But since in our country, there are people willing to pay and we don't have differential fee structure. There are universities which even today charge 200 rupees for a course where a private university is charging as much as maybe 2 lakhs for that same course. So there is no criteria in which we are rationalizing the fees. We rationalize the fees only for professional courses like medicine, engineering, and a few other courses. The general education we do not. And so the self-financing institutions leverage that power of the people who are willing to pay. And we say, okay, a poor student having merit may not find a seat in self-financing college, but may be available in a public funded institution. So that is the model that we have. And NEP does take punitive role, recognition of it, but it has a limited role in being able to say that we can shut down such institutions, because it is the right of an individual having had the kind of economic power to set up institutions. And that is something we cannot, in a country which recognizes liberty and the fundamental right that they enjoy, whether they are minority run institutions or whether they are industry run institutions. We have a limited right because we cannot infringe upon that. The affordability can be only addressed through public funded institutions.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other participant wish to know?
Ma'am,
Any query, question? Ji, Amit sir.
Yes.
Please to the point, sir.
Ma'am, recently we have got a letter for applying autonomy in my government college. But there are certain points which have been mentioned in that document that that government college should can apply who has A+ NEC accreditation grading. समस्या मैम ये है कि अगर A+ ग्रेडिंग के लिए ही अप्लाई करेंगे तो बहुत से गवर्नमेंट कॉलेज उससे छूट जाएंगे, क्योंकि A+ के लिए हमें ऑटोनॉमी पाने के लिए भी ऑटोनॉमी चाहिए। क्यों? क्योंकि हम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के लेवल पर पिछड़ रहे हैं। हम गवर्नमेंट कॉलेज हैं, हम अपॉइंटिंग अथॉरिटी भी नहीं है अपनी फैकल्टीज़ के। हम फाइनेंस के लिए भी अप्लाई करते हैं तो बहुत ही दिक्कतें आती हैं। स्थिति यह है कि शासन के स्तर से राशि अवमुक्त की जाती है मार्च के महीने में और उसे 31 मार्च तक ही कंज्यूम करना है। हाँ, और उसके लिए वो राशि पूरी चली जाती है। हम ऐसा लड्डू है जिसे न खाया जा सकता है न किसी को खिलाया जा सकता है, वो वापस चला जाता है। तो ऐसी स्थितियों में अगर हम परफॉर्म नहीं कर पा रहे हैं तो हम A+ कैसे पाएंगे, और A+ पाएंगे नहीं तो ऑटोनॉमी कैसे पाएंगे, और हम अपना इंस्टीट्यूशन डेवलपमेंट प्लान जिस IDP की बात कर रहे हैं उसको बनाने के बावजूद भी उस पर काम नहीं कर पाएंगे। इसके बारे में भी सोचना होगा।
आपके आई कैन फुली अप्रिशिएट, क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ मिनिस्ट्री से जब फंड जाती थी, हमारी एक एफर्ट थी एज फार एज पॉसिबल द लास्ट क्वार्टर का जो फंड्स है, जो जनवरी से मार्च का क्वार्टर होती है, कि एटलीस्ट सेंड इट टू देम इन द मंथ ऑफ January, so that they are able to actually spend it by March. But you're talking, I suppose, about the year-long grants which come to you in the month of March, and then you are asked to spend it and you can't spend it, and so the funds go back unutilized to the government back again. And this whole thing between autonomy and accreditation is a growing reality, that to get autonomy you must have accreditation and a minimum benchmark of A+ accreditation. And if you do not have that, you are not capable of getting autonomy. This is something that today, if I may mention, there is a Radhakrishnan committee which is looking at accreditation reforms based on NEP's recommendation. And we have now moved two things. One is that it is binary accreditation, so that all institutions are encouraged to come in for accreditation. And the graded accreditation that we had will change from the coming January, in the light of trying to look at not just that inspection and that visit and so on, but on the basis of self-declaration. So these accreditation reforms will help institutions to maybe first be sure that yes, we got the accreditation, it's already an accredited, and within that we are not going to do the SSR form itself is a big exercise. That exercise will be only through technology, through an MIS system with no inspections. So that accreditation, ease of getting accreditation, in a certain sense should be able to help institutions like yours. But yes, government colleges wanting or being encouraged by the government to take up autonomy must have hand-holding, must have enough support, infrastructural, funding, faculty, teaching learning resources coming from the government so that they are able to become autonomous over a period of time. And it is not an easy task. We are envisaging as long a time as about 10 years by which institutions can move to that direction. So I fully appreciate your concerns, but this will happen, and we have to really take a stock somewhere around 2030 first to know how many institutions have taken advantage of NEP's appeal to become autonomous colleges, at the same time be accredited and participate in the rankings. But yes, without funding, without support, without hand-holding, without mentoring by the host university, it is very difficult to walk that path down. And I'm sure we will have ways in which the first step, as I told you, are the accreditation reforms that have already started taking place.
I think, ma'am, there is no more question because no hand raise. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your this nice deliberation. As you always give us new information, and आपका लेक्चर जो होता है मैडम हर बार लगता है कि कुछ नई चीज है, क्योंकि मैं तो हर बार सुनता हूँ मैम, तो हर बार कुछ नए न्यू एडिशंस होते हैं. With these words on behalf of HRDC, I would like to thank you again कि आपने अपने कीमती वक्त से थोड़ा वक्त हमारे लिए इन यंग रिसर्चर एंड फैकल्टी मेंबर्स के लिए आपने निकाला, जिससे कि हम लोग बहुत ही इससे बेनिफिट होगा हमारे लिए. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया मैम. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Thank you very much, and let me all wish you a happy Dasara too, and let the festive spirit always have the good.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Always
ma'am.
aspire for our things. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Happy Dasara.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Please join again at 5:30. We have another lecture at 5:30.
Okay, sir.